Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Tuesday, October 7th, 2025. This is USA Today's The Excerpt. Today, the latest surrounding National Guard troops and the courts, plus what's next for government shutdown talks and how the shutdown is rocking Virginia's governor's race. A federal judge yesterday decided to allow National Guard members to deploy to Illinois, despite the objections of Governor J.B. Pritzker.
We don't want troops on the streets of Chicago.
The decision comes as other National Guard troops are in limbo elsewhere, while President Donald Trump battles with the courts over deployments in American cities. I spoke with USA Today national security and world affairs reporter Sibel Mays-Osterman for more. Sibel, thank you so much for joining me on a busy day.
Thanks for having me, Taylor.
So, Sibel, what's the latest from Portland? How are troops now in a kind of limbo, and how is this playing out in the courts?
So Trump attempted first to take control of some 200 Oregon National Guard troops, and this happened late last week. And then after a judge ruled that he couldn't do that, he tried to bring in California National Guard troops instead, 200 of them, and he also deployed Texas National Guard troops, 400 of those. So right after the judge issued this temporary restraining order saying that he couldn't take control of the Oregon troops, then after that, hours later, the California troops were already on the way. In fact, some of them arriving at a Air National Guard base over in Portland. And right now, those troops are in limbo. The judge issued another temporary restraining order right after that saying that he couldn't bring any federalized National Guard troops into the city for the reason stated, which is that Trump is saying that they're needed to defend an ICE facility against protesters. And the judge ruled that that could not go forward temporarily right now.
All right. And Sibel, I guess a similar kind of standoff is now happening in Chicago as well, correct?
Yes. So Trump has been saying for weeks and weeks that he wants to deploy the National Guard to Chicago. And we've been waiting for this. He's been hinting at this. Finally, a few days ago, Trump handed down the order to deploy Illinois National Guard troops. And the governor, the state's governor, J.B. Pritzker, is now saying that he has filed a lawsuit against that deployment. He's also saying that Governor Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, needs to not comply with an order from Trump to send his National Guard troops down in Texas up to Illinois, if that is, in fact, what the administration has in mind.
Sibel, really, what is the broader Trump administration strategy here?
Well, we've seen the Trump administration try to deploy National Guard troops to several different cities. Trump has said that some cities, many of which are run by Democrats or in states with Democratic governors, are dangerous. And he's said that the National Guard is needed to sort of crack down on crime. And then in turn, we've seen pushback from that. The U.S. military is, I've heard from experts, not traditionally used to carry out law enforcement duties. And in fact, if Trump doesn't have the consent of the state's governor, then in the law, those troops are not able to carry out law enforcement functions. But we've still seen the Trump administration try to pursue this strategy. We've seen troops are still deployed in the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. We've seen troops deployed earlier this year in Los Angeles to respond to protests against mass deportations by the Trump administration. So this is an ongoing strategy for the Trump administration.
Well, Sibel, you touched on this a bit, but is there really any precedent for how he and his administration are approaching this?
What I'm hearing from experts is that even though there's certainly precedent for presidents taking control of troops, and it's called federalizing them and sending troops, there is also precedent for them sending troops into other states that they're not from. The way that Trump is pursuing this, the way that Trump is using the military to go into other cities in this broad way is pretty unprecedented.
Where do you see this going next, Sibel? I know we have a few interesting days ahead.
I'm just seeing the news alerts now that Trump said in the Oval Office that he maybe would consider invoking the Insurrection Act. And that would be a way for him to justify sending troops into more cities because legally speaking, the president would need to say that there's an insurrection or rebellion in order to be able to exercise those broad authorities to use the troops in this way. So it remains to be seen, and these legal battles are going to keep playing out.
All right. Sibel Mays-Osterman covers national security and world affairs for USA Today. Thanks for the time, Sibel. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Taylor.
Lawmakers continue to play the blame game as the federal government shutdown moved into a new week, and there appears to be little to no progress. House Speaker Mike Johnson and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries appeared on NBC's Meet the Press on Sunday, where they addressed the current status of funding talks. Jeffries said then that the last time he spoke with Republican leaders was in a White House meeting with Trump late last month. Meanwhile, Johnson said it's up to Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and his Democratic colleagues to support the Republican-crafted spending bill that passed in the House in September. And Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy said yesterday that the government shutdown is adding stress to already overworked and understaffed air traffic controllers, as some areas have seen an uptick in controllers calling in sick. You can read more about that with a link in today's show notes. The federal shutdown and DOGE cuts are rocking the upcoming governor's race in Virginia. I spoke with USA Today national news reporter Carissa Waddick for more about that and what the race might mean more broadly. Thanks for hopping on, Carissa.
Happy to be here, Taylor.
Carissa, just set the stage for us, if you would. Who are the players in this governor's race next month?
On the left, we have Democrat Abigail Spanberger. She's a former CIA agent who also used to represent a district in Northern Virginia. And for those who know the state, the district she represented was about an hour south of Washington, D.C., where there are a lot of federal workers who commute up to D.C. to work. And then on the right, we have Republican Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earle-Sears. She served in the U.S. Marine Corps. She owned a plumbing and electrical appliance business, and she was also on the Virginia House of Delegates for a while. There's also another player in this race, though, who is not on the ballot, and his name is President Donald Trump. The Virginia race is often seen as a referendum on the current president, who is always elected the year prior to the governor's race, and this year is being seen as a referendum on Trump.
All right, interesting. We'll get a little bit more on that here in a bit, Carissa. But, we're talking during this big government shutdown. How are this latest shutdown and, some of the government job cuts within it hanging over this election?
It's huge in this area, given the amount of federal workers who work in Virginia, especially Northern Virginia. I was standing outside of a Fairfax County government center where there was early voting a couple of days ago. And I was talking to voters about this. And there was one man who told me that he was worried. His wife is a federal worker. He is a stay-at-home father, but he has veterans benefits that he's not sure if will come through as federal workers kind of are furloughed and actions stop. So he said that he was a centrist and he's thinking about voting for Spanberger, and that's weighing on his mind. And he's definitely not alone in that. We've seen polls. There was a Washington Post poll that came out last week that showed a majority of Americans are holding Trump and Republicans responsible for the shutdown. And if those numbers hold in Virginia, that could spell kind of doom for the GOP in this election. Spanberger has consistently held a lead over her opponent, about a 10-point lead in this race. And so that's something that we're going to be watching very closely in the coming month.
All right. And Carissa, we should say some of these tensions really started over previous DOGE cuts, I guess even going back weeks and months, correct?
Yes. So Virginia, like I said, has one of the highest populations of federal employees in the country. More than 5% of the state's workforce is employed by the federal government. And so it saw more than 20,000 people lose their jobs just between January and May of this year. That's according to Federal Reserve data. And so for a lot of people, those cuts had a major impact on their well-being. We went to Fredericksburg, which is a quaint historic town about an hour south of Washington, D.C. And I spoke with a man, his name was Stuart Smothers, and he said that a lot of his friends had been impacted, whether by needing to go into the office earlier this year because of orders from the Trump administration or cuts from the federal government losing their jobs. Some of those friends, he said, voted for Trump last year, and he doesn't know how it'll impact them. Their lives have been thrown into this turmoil. Another man in Fairfax said that he did lose his job because of the Trump administration. He worked at USAID, and he told me that he was using his time, currently unemployed, to cast his ballot for Spanberger and against Republicans who put him in that spot.
All Interesting, Chris. So what other issues did you hear about from voters in reporting this piece?
Tons of different topics are on people's minds. The economy always stands out as a top issue for voters, no matter what election it is. And that was true this year as well. A lot of Democratic voters also mentioned democracy and fears about the Trump administration taking too much power as being top of mind. On the right, there was a lot of culture war issues that were mentioned. One of the issues that Winsome Earl-Sears has campaigned on is transgender students' use of bathrooms in schools and on sports teams. I spoke with a mom who said that issue was really top of mind for her in Fairfax County schools, which have seen lawsuits from the Trump administration over some of their policies related to transgender students.
All right. Well, Chris, you earlier mentioned Donald Trump's name. I mean, just why is this race important nationally? What potentially are the broader implications here?
So this is one of the first major races since the presidential election last year in 2024. It's kind of where we see how voters are landing on some of Trump's major policies and what it means for them. It's also where parties start to figure out what their messaging is going to look like ahead of the 2026 midterms next year, which will determine who has control over Congress. And so it's really just this referendum where we get to see in real time how some of the American public is feeling about current policies.
All right. Another great piece from you, Carissa. Carissa Waddy covers national news for USA Today. Thank you, Carissa.
Thanks so much.
The Supreme Court yesterday declined to decide whether Jeffrey Epstein associate Ghislaine Maxwell was wrongly prosecuted for sex trafficking. The justices rejected an appeal from Maxwell, who argued that a deal Epstein struck with federal prosecutors in Florida should have prevented her from being charged in New York. Hours later, President Trump told reporters in the Oval Office that he would take a look at it when asked about a potential pardon for Maxwell. She's serving a 20-year prison sentence after her 2021 conviction for trafficking a minor to engage in sex acts with Epstein. Trump also told reporters yesterday that Sean Diddy Combs has requested a pardon, as he's set to serve several more years behind bars. Diddy was sentenced to 50 months in prison last week after the hip-hop mogul was convicted in his federal sex crimes case. He could be released in less than 3 years after receiving credit for time already spent locked up. Thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio, and you can always find us on email at podcasts@usatoday.com. I'm Taylor Wilson. I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.